Welcome to the Morning Meditation Podcast with your host, Joe Consford, brought to you by HardwareOnTheSquare.com.
Abounding grace, 2 Corinthians 9:8. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. Paul is challenging the church at Corinth to give. One of the gifts he speaks of is the offering for the poor saints in Jerusalem. He took a special offering from the Gentiles to the Jewish saints in Jerusalem who had fallen on hard times. But Paul does not just write about the specific offering for the poor saints in chapters 8 through 10. There are verses where he deals with giving in general. The principle of giving is dealt with in chapter 9, verse 6 and 7. Not the tithe. Giving is in addition to the tithe. Paul teaches that giving is possible because giving is a grace. 2 Corinthians 8, 1 and 7. The grace is a gift of enablement from the Lord. What God gives, the saint must trust him for. Therefore, there is a claim made by Paul in our text that solicits faith on the part of the reader. We will discover that the claim made by Paul goes beyond giving to the whole Christian life. We will look at this verse, and as we do, I want to point out four things that seem to be what Paul is saying. First, we see the encouragement to believe. Paul says, and God is able to make all grace abound toward you. The "and" is a continuative conjunction that link what Paul claims here to the words, he that soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully, and every man as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, and God loveth a cheerful giver. When people who are having it tough financially are challenged to give, the natural response is to say, hey, I'd love to do it, but we have a hard time paying our own bills. That is an understandable response. It is a response that even the more affluent will say when they reach a certain point in giving. Paul is saying that the answer to that is not rationalism, but faith. If God is able to make all grace abound toward you, then it is not a matter of our ability, but His. The words, God is able, mean that God is strong. His strength is unlimited. We have an all-powerful God, and He will be as active in our lives as we are willing to believe. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Faith is that by which we walk. It is the breath and the heartbeat of the Christian life. God is honored when we trust Him, and will bless the one who trusts. When we quit believing, we cease to be actively engaged in God's kingdom and work and operate only in the world in which unsaved people live. I have a book called Your God is Too Small by J.B. Phillips. The very title of the book is a rebuke to most of us. If what we do is determined by God's power, and His power is appropriated by faith, then if the work is not being done, it has to be because the Christian does not believe God is big enough or faithful enough to trust. Then we see the extent of Paul's claim. The word to make all grace abound means to exceed a fixed number or measure, to be left over and above a certain number or measure. The word grace is used in chapter 8 and verse 1 to explain the generous giving of the poverty-stricken churches in Macedonia. God, in His grace, had enabled them to do what they could not have done otherwise. Most of us are familiar with the definition of grace that says it is the unmerited favor of God. That is a good definition. If this definition holds true as it applies to the giving of the churches of Macedonia, then it means that God took a group of sinners saved by the grace of God, who were also very imperfect and did not deserve to be used in any special way, but used them anyway because they did dare to believe that He was big enough to enable them, and He could be trusted to do it. Now that is a good statement, even if I did make it. God's grace in any area of God's supply and our need makes Him available to us no matter how unworthy we feel. Our feeling of unworthiness is something Satan uses to fight us away from answers to prayer on a regular basis. Now, if we have known sin in our lives that we are unwilling to deal with, then Psalm 66:18, which says, "If I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me," would keep us from getting our request answered. If we have dealt with known sin, then the blood of Jesus Christ that cleanses us from all sin and His grace makes Him available to our faith as we believe Him for the answers. The words "all graced" must cover every area of need in the Christian's life. It is not just giving. If you are healed in answer to prayer, it is grace. Here is someone who has faithfully served the Lord for years and he gets sick. He prays and is healed by the Lord. You watch and analyze that situation. You say, "He deserved that answer to prayer." A week later, you have a physical malady appear in your own life. Your life does not, in your estimation, even come close to being the kind of godly life lived by that other person. So suddenly, you feel despair because you misjudged the reason that this other person was healed. You see, the other person was not healed because he had been faithful for years. He was healed because he and those who prayed humbly themselves in the presence of God and came before Him in the name of the one who is worthy and received the grace of healing. What God does for us is based on grace and not worthiness. Until we see that, our prayer life will be barren. Because Satan will argue successfully that we do not deserve the answer and we will have to agree with him. So the reason for our unanswered prayer is not because we are not worthy, but because we did not believe, and our lack of faith was because of our misunderstanding of grace. What is your need right now? Most of us have needs. If all your personal needs are being met in your family, how are you coming along with your obedience to the Great Commission? You see, we have needs that we do not know about because we are not facing our responsibility as His children. What about personal witnessing? Do you need power? What about your relationship with family members or your relationship with fellow believers in the local church of your membership? Do you need wisdom? What about the loss of temper in the home where you scream at the kids? Do you need patience and grace to apologize? Do I need to go further? Paul says, "And God is able to make all grace abound toward you." Do we believe this statement? Next, we see the sufficiency enjoyed. Our text says, "That ye always having all sufficiency in all things." The word always means at all times, always, ever. The definition is plain enough for us to see that God is making himself available so that there will not be a time in our lives that he will not be there to supply our needs according to his grace. With this promise, we do not have to worry about anything in our future. Most of the time we worry about things that never happen. So what if something bad does take place? God allowed it for our good and his glory, and this verse says that we will always have all sufficiency in all things. God will be there to meet every need of the trusting soul. The word having is a present tense verb and means that we will keep on having. Is God supplying your needs now? This verse is saying that as he is supplying now, he will continue to do so. He will not abandon you. You can count on his trustworthiness. The words all means every and each. And the word sufficiency means a perfect condition of life in which no aid or support is needed, sufficiency of the necessities of life, a mind contented with its lot, contentment. This is what Paul says God is able to do for us on the basis of grace. And then finally, we see the work empowered. Our text says, may abound to every good work. The words may abound mean the same as defined above. There will be more than enough of the supply of grace to supply us to every good work. The immediate good work in the context is giving. God is able to enable us to give abundantly to meet our needs. This word means that our giving can be so abundant that it surpasses the need. There was a time when Moses had to tell the people of Israel to stop giving. They had given more than enough. This is what is meant here. But the words every good work goes beyond the immediate subject in the chapter of giving. What about the dear lady who is married to an unsaved man, who is mean and unkind to her? Her situation is a lot more desperate than one who has never walked in her shoes could possibly imagine. She is a true believer who wants to live her life by the book, and she knows divorce is not the answer. This verse says that God will meet her need of grace with patience to bear her burden with the grace of a Spirit-filled Christian. The word work here is not just the work of a missionary or a pastor or a Sunday school teacher. It includes the everyday life of a Christian. It is a good work for a Christian to go to his job each day and put in a day's work for a day's pay and live out his Christian life before the unsaved around him. What he needs to accomplish that, God, in his grace, will supply, so that he may abound to every good work. This is a great verse with a great appeal for faith. May the Lord enlighten us that we may take the challenge to believe him, that we may be recipients of his daily grace to supply our daily needs. May the Lord bless these words to our hearts today.
Join us each day as we meditate on the Word together. Be sure to subscribe and leave an objective review on your favorite podcast player app. You can always find us on the web at hardwareonthesquare.com/podcast.